What if I told you that the very thing making you feel like an outsider, that constant awareness that something is deeply wrong with how everyone around you is living, is not a curse, but a form of psychological awakening that most people spend their entire lives running from? What if the loneliness you feel when you look around and see people chasing things that seem so obviously empty is not a sign that something is broken inside you, but evidence that something has finally begun to work? What if Alan Watts was right when he said that the real hopeless victims of mental illness are to be found among those who appear to be most normal, and that many of them are normal because they are so well adjusted to our mode of existence, because their human voice has been silenced so early in their lives that they do not even struggle or suffer or develop symptoms as the neurotic does? Have you ever sat in a room full of people, perhaps at a family gathering or a work meeting, and felt this strange disconnection, this sense that everyone is playing a game whose rules you never agreed to follow? Have you ever watched someone you love destroy themselves chasing approval or money or status and felt this painful clarity about what they were doing to themselves, while also knowing that if you said anything they would look at you like you were the crazy one? Have you ever felt exhausted not from doing too much but from pretending, from holding back what you really see, from participating in conversations that feel like elaborate dances around everything that actually matters? Picture this. You are at dinner with old friends. Everyone is talking about their promotions, their new cars, their renovation projects, their children's achievements. And somewhere inside you, there is this voice saying, "None of this is real. None of this is what we actually came here to talk about. None of this is going to matter when we are dying." But you smile and nod and ask the right questions because you learned long ago that saying what you actually see makes people uncomfortable. Or perhaps you are scrolling through social media, watching people perform happiness, perform success, perform having it all figured out, and you feel this mixture of sadness and frustration because you can see the desperation underneath. You can see how hard everyone is working to convince themselves and others that the emperor is wearing magnificent clothes. Or maybe you are lying awake at 3 in the morning and the thoughts come flooding in, thoughts about meaning and death and what any of this is actually for, and you realize that you have no one you can really share these thoughts with because the few times you tried, people changed the subject or told you not to think so much or looked at you with concern like you were developing a problem. This is the burden of seeing what others refuse to see. And if you have felt this way, if you have carried this weight of perception that nobody asked you to carry, then I want you to know that you are not alone. And more importantly, you are not wrong. The isolation you feel is not a symptom of your dysfunction. It is often a symptom of your clarity. And Alan Watts, the British philosopher who spent his life bridging Eastern wisdom and Western confusion, understood this burden better than almost anyone. The phenomenon of heightened perception creating social isolation has been documented by researchers across multiple fields. Psychologist Kazimierz Dabrowski developed an entire theory around what he called positive disintegration, the idea that psychological sensitivity and the suffering it causes are actually necessary stages in developing a more authentic and integrated personality. Studies in social psychology have repeatedly shown that people who score high on measures of reflective thinking often report greater feelings of alienation from mainstream social life. Existential psychologists from Viktor Frankl to Irvin Yalom have written extensively about how confronting ultimate concerns like death, freedom, isolation, and meaninglessness, while necessary for authentic living, often creates a profound sense of being out of step with a culture that is organized around avoiding these very questions. History is filled with individuals who carried this burden of seeing. Socrates, who was executed for asking questions that made people uncomfortable with their unexamined lives. The Buddha, who left a palace of pleasure because he could not unsee the reality of suffering. Kierkegaard, who described the despair of living in a society that had made it possible to be a success in life while being a failure as a human being. These were not pessimists or misanthropes. They were people whose eyes had opened and who discovered that there is a particular kind of loneliness that comes with seeing clearly. Alan Watts was born in 1915 in England, and from an early age he was drawn to questions that most people learn to stop asking around the age of 7. While other children were learning to fit in, to play the social games that would determine their future success, Watts was sitting in libraries reading about Buddhism and Taoism and Christian mysticism, trying to understand why the adults around him seemed so unhappy despite doing everything they were supposed to do. He later wrote about recognizing, even as a child, that the social order was not really interested in producing happy human beings, but in producing useful, productive, controllable ones. This early perception would shape everything that followed. What Watts came to understand, first through his study of Eastern philosophy and later through his own experience as a priest, professor, and eventually a cultural outsider, was that the modern Western world had created a particular kind of madness and then called it normal. The madness was this: to believe that you are a separate ego locked inside a bag of skin in competition with every other ego, trying to accumulate enough success and security and pleasure to make this brief existence worthwhile before the void claims you. Watts saw that this was not the human condition. This was a culturally constructed condition, a story we had been told so many times that we forgot it was a story. The burden of seeing what others refuse to see is really the burden of having recognized, even partially, that the story is a story. When you see this, certain things become painfully obvious. You see that most people are running on a treadmill that was not designed to get them anywhere, only to keep them running. You see that the goals society offers, the bigger house, the better job, the perfect body, the impressive reputation, are not solutions to the human condition, but distractions from it. You see that the people who seem most successful and confident are often the most deeply anxious because they have staked everything on achievements that part of them knows will never be enough. And you see that pointing any of this out, even gently, even lovingly, tends to make people defensive, because you are threatening the only framework they have for making sense of their lives. Watts described this as the double bind of human consciousness. We are taught from birth to become somebody, to develop a strong ego, to make something of ourselves. But the very process of becoming this somebody involves a kind of forgetting. We forget that we did not create ourselves, that the boundaries between self and world are conceptual rather than actual, that the person we are trying to become is itself a performance for an audience that is also performing. And those who begin to remember, those whose eyes start to open, find themselves in an impossible position. They can see that the game is a game, but everyone around them is playing it completely seriously, and there is enormous social pressure to either keep playing or be labeled as defective. I want to pause here for a moment, because I know that what we are discussing is not just theoretical for you. Right now, you might be recognizing patterns you have lived with for years, patterns that no one else has truly seen or understood. When was the moment you first realized that you were seeing things differently than the people around you? That moment when it became clear that your discomfort with normal life was not going to go away just because you tried harder to fit in. If you are comfortable, share in the comments. I first noticed I was seeing differently when. Your experience, shared anonymously or not, creates a light for someone else who is walking that same path right now, feeling completely alone. Every time you share a piece of your story, you are doing exactly what Watts understood was the antidote to isolation, creating genuine connection through shared recognition. And if you are not ready to share, that is completely okay too. Just know that as you continue watching, I am speaking directly to your experience, not just to a general audience. The things you have seen that you cannot unsee are precisely what we are addressing here. Watts developed his understanding of this burden through decades of unusual experience. He was ordained as an Episcopal priest in his 20s, only to leave the church when he realized that institutional religion had become another form of the very conformity it was supposed to transcend. He became a professor of comparative philosophy, teaching at the American Academy of Asian Studies in San Francisco, where he encountered the Beat generation and became a kind of bridge between ancient Eastern wisdom and modern Western seeking. He saw how desperately people wanted to wake up, and also how quickly they would turn any method of awakening into another ego project, another achievement to add to their resume of spiritual accomplishments. What made Watts unusual among philosophers was his insistence that the problem was not intellectual, but perceptual. You cannot argue someone into seeing what they are not ready to see. You cannot prove through logic that the separate ego is an illusion. You can only point, suggest, invite, and those who already sense the truth will recognize it, while those who are not ready will hear only nonsense or threat. This is why the burden falls so heavily on those who see. There is no way to fully share your perception with those who do not share it. You are left carrying knowledge that should be liberating, but often feels like a weight. The way Watts described it, most people are playing what he called the game of black and white. This is the game where you try to make the white side win and the black side lose. You try to accumulate more pleasure and less pain, more success and less failure, more life and less death. The entire structure of modern life is organized around this game. Our economics, our medicine, our education, our religion in its popular forms are all about helping the white side win. But here is what Watts saw that most people refuse to see. The white side cannot win, not because we are not trying hard enough, but because white and black are two sides of the same coin. Every up creates a down. Every win creates a loss. Every attempt to escape death makes us more afraid of it. The game is rigged, not against us, but in a way that makes winning and losing equally illusory. When you see this, when you really see it and not just understand it intellectually, something shifts. You stop being quite so invested in the game. You start to find the frantic efforts of the players around you somewhat puzzling. Why are they working so hard? Can they not see? But of course they cannot see, or they are not ready to see, or they have seen and chosen to forget, because the forgetting is more comfortable. And so you find yourself in a strange position, awake enough to see the dream, but not awake enough to stop caring that everyone else is dreaming. This burden manifests in contemporary life in countless ways. Perhaps you work in an office where everyone seems to believe that the reports and meetings and productivity metrics actually matter in some ultimate sense, and you do your job, but you cannot shake the feeling that you are participating in an elaborate game of pretend. Perhaps your family measures success in ways that feel hollow to you, and every holiday gathering is an exercise in code switching between what you really think and what you are allowed to say. Perhaps you have tried therapy or self-help books or meditation apps, and while they sometimes provide temporary relief, they never quite address the fundamental issue, which is not that you are broken, but that you see clearly in a world that rewards comfortable blindness. The psychological mechanism behind this burden is actually well documented, even if it is rarely discussed in these terms. Human beings are fundamentally social creatures. We evolved in small groups where fitting in was literally a matter of survival. Our nervous systems are wired to seek approval and avoid rejection. When you see things that others do not see or will not see, your nervous system registers this as a form of social danger. The isolation is not just psychological, but physiological. Your body interprets your perception as a threat to your belonging, and it responds with stress, anxiety, and the urge to either conform or withdraw. Watts understood this and spoke frequently about the body's wisdom. He noticed that many seekers, many people burdened with perception, were at war with their own nervous systems. They tried to think their way out of anxiety, to convince themselves that they should not care what others think, to force themselves into equanimity. But the body knows better. The body knows that we need connection, and that seeing what others refuse to see threatens connection. The solution, Watts suggested, was not to override the body, but to find a different kind of connection, one based on shared recognition rather than shared pretense. How do you know if you carry this burden? There are several signs that tend to appear consistently. You find small talk almost physically painful, not because you are antisocial, but because the gap between what is being said and what could be said feels enormous. You have a history of starting things, jobs, relationships, projects, spiritual practices with enthusiasm and then becoming disillusioned when you see that they too are part of the game. You vacillate between wanting to help people wake up and wanting to withdraw from people entirely. You have been called too intense, too serious, too much, too deep, and part of you agrees that these are problems while another part of you knows they are not problems at all. You find yourself drawn to thinkers like Watts, to philosophies that name what you have been seeing, because finding words for your perception feels like being handed oxygen after years of suffocation. If you recognize yourself in this description, here are some practices that can help you carry the burden without being crushed by it. First, Watts would say, stop trying to convince anyone. The attempt to wake others up is usually just the ego finding a new game to play. Instead, live your perception. Demonstrate what is possible when someone stops fighting reality and starts dancing with it. People who are ready to see will notice. Those who are not ready will not, and no amount of argument will change that. Second, find your people, even if they are few. Watts surrounded himself with other seekers, other questioners, other people who had glimpsed behind the curtain. These connections were not based on pretending to be normal together, but on being abnormal together. You do not need many such connections. A few genuine ones are worth more than 1,000 friendships built on mutual performance. Third, let your seeing include yourself. One of the traps for people with this burden is turning their perception into another form of superiority. They see through others, but not through themselves. They become the ego that has transcended ego, which is, of course, just ego in a more sophisticated costume. Watts was merciless about this trap. Whatever you see out there, he would say, look for it in here. Fourth, practice what Watts called the wisdom of insecurity. Stop trying to achieve a permanent state of clarity or peace. The burden gets heavier when you are trying to put it down forever. Instead, learn to carry it lightly, knowing that your own perception is also partial, also conditioned, also a kind of dream. This paradox, seeing clearly that even your clear seeing is limited, is not a contradiction. It is freedom. The deeper philosophical implication of this burden is that it points to something profound about the nature of consciousness itself. Watts often said that a human being is an aperture through which the universe is looking at itself. When your seeing expands beyond the conventional boundaries, you are participating in the universe becoming more aware of itself. This is not ego inflation. It is the recognition that the seeing is not really yours. It is happening through you. You did not create your heightened perception any more than you created your eye color. It arose from causes and conditions you did not choose, and it is serving some purpose in the larger pattern, even when that purpose is invisible to you. This does not make the burden lighter in any immediate sense, but it does reframe it. You are not carrying this weight as punishment or as proof of your separateness. You are carrying it as part of your function in the whole. Some people are meant to see. Some people are meant to point. Some people are meant to sit at the edge of the village and ask questions that the others would rather not hear. This has always been so. Shamans, prophets, philosophers, poets, artists, mystics. These are the people who carry the burden of perception in every culture. They are not always honored, often they are rejected, but they are necessary. The culture that loses its seers loses its ability to correct course. Here is your challenge for the coming week. Choose one situation where you normally perform, where you say what you are supposed to say rather than what you actually see. It might be a conversation with a family member, a meeting at work, an interaction on social media. In that one situation, experiment with being slightly more honest, not aggressive, not preachy, not trying to wake anyone up, just slightly more true to what you actually perceive. Notice what happens. Notice the discomfort. Notice whether anyone responds differently. Notice whether you survive. This is how you begin to integrate your seeing into your living, one small, honest moment at a time. Watts spent the last years of his life walking this path, imperfectly, humanly, with all the contradictions that real life entails. He drank too much, by his own admission using alcohol to manage the intensity of perception. He went through marriages, through financial difficulties, through periods of doubt about whether anything he was saying was making any difference. He was not a saint. He was a seer who struggled with the same burdens he described. And there is something comforting in that. The goal is not to transcend the human condition. The goal is to be fully human, which includes carrying what you see, stumbling under its weight sometimes, and keeping walking anyway. If you have ever felt trapped by your own perception, isolated by your own clarity, exhausted by the gap between what is and what everyone pretends, you are not alone on this journey. This channel is a space where we explore these questions honestly, without promising easy answers or pretending that waking up is always pleasant. By subscribing, you are not just following content. You are joining a community of people who carry similar burdens, who are learning to carry them together, who have stopped pretending that normal is the same as healthy. Each week, we explore another aspect of this terrain, drawing on Watts and others who have mapped the territory of awakened consciousness. These are not quick fixes. They are companionship for a long journey. I know how isolating it can feel when you see what others refuse to see. That is why I am committed to creating content that meets you exactly where you are, that names what you have been experiencing, that offers not solutions, but solidarity. Subscribe so we can continue this journey together, one step at a time, at your own pace. If something in today's video resonated with you, that is not coincidence. That is recognition. Your capacity to see, even when it feels like a burden, is a gift. Not a gift that makes life easier, but a gift that makes life more real. Hit subscribe and let us discover together what becomes possible when we stop pretending and start seeing. I will be here, every step of the way. Share in the comments one moment when you realized you were seeing something that others around you could not or would not see. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now.